It was one of those nights when the city glowed brighter than the stars above it. Expensive cars lined up outside the Crystal Hall, where laughter and music spilled through the open doors. Inside, the richest people in town gathered for an exclusive charity gala hosted by one of the country's most powerful businessmen, a man known for his arrogance as much as his wealth. Among the servers, walking carefully between the tables, was a young woman named Lena. Her uniform was neatly pressed but old, and the shoes she wore were slightly worn out from too many long shifts. She didn't talk much. She simply smiled politely as she poured drinks and replaced empty plates. No one really noticed her. To them, she was just another waitress. But inside, Lena was quietly observing everything. The chandeliers, the piano in the corner, the polished marble floors. It all reminded her of a life she once dreamed of long ago. Before life took a turn she never expected. As she placed a tray of glasses on a table, she caught a glimpse of the grand piano standing proudly near the stage. Its black surface shone under the warm lights, and something deep inside her stirred. It had been years since she'd touched a piano. She used to play every day, losing herself in melodies that felt like another world. But now those memories felt distant, like a song she could barely remember the words to. The guests continued chatting, their laughter loud and careless. The host of the evening, Mr. Dalton, stood at the center of it all. He was tall, dressed in a dark suit with a smile that looked confident but cold. He loved attention, and he enjoyed reminding everyone just how rich and powerful he was. He didn't know Lena, of course. People like him rarely noticed people like her. But that night, fate had a strange plan. As Lena passed by with her tray, Mr. Dalton's eyes landed on her. Maybe it was because she moved quietly, or maybe he was just looking for a moment of entertainment. He nudged his friend beside him and said something that made the man laugh. Then he called out loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Hey, waitress!" Lena froze. She turned, unsure if he was really talking to her. "Yes, sir?" she asked softly, her voice barely audible over the music. Mr. Dalton gave a mocking smile. "You've been walking around all night looking so serious. Why don't you lighten up the mood a little?" A few guests chuckled. Lena didn't know what he meant, so she simply nodded and tried to smile politely. But then he pointed toward the grand piano. "Tell me," he said, "do you know how to play that thing?" The room grew a little quieter. Some guests turned their heads, curious. Lena hesitated, not sure how to answer. I used to," she said quietly. "You used to?" Mr. Dalton repeated, pretending to be impressed. "Well then, tonight's your lucky night. Go ahead. Play something for us." The sound of laughter spread through the crowd. Some clapped as if encouraging her. Others smirked behind their glasses of champagne. Lena's heart pounded. She wanted to disappear. She looked down, gripping the tray tightly. "I'm sorry, sir, but I'm here to serve, not to perform," she said gently. But Mr. Dalton wasn't listening. He waved his hand dismissively. "Oh, come on, it's just a bit of fun. You said you used to play, right? Let's see if you've still got it." He turned to his guests. "What do you say, everyone? Should our waitress give us a little performance?" The crowd responded with laughter and applause, some cheering as if it were a game. Lena felt her face heat up. She didn't want to make a scene, but refusing him would only make it worse. The staff nearby exchanged nervous glances, unsure what to do. Taking a deep breath, Lena placed her tray down and slowly walked toward the piano. Each step felt heavier than the last. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, some amused, some curious, a few even sympathetic. When she reached the piano, she hesitated. Her reflection stared back at her from the glossy surface of the instrument. She hadn't touched one in almost 7 years. The last time she played, her mother had been sitting beside her, listening with a proud smile. That memory alone gave her the strength to pull out the bench and sit down. The pianist who had been hired for the event stood nearby, arms crossed, watching her with a faint smirk. He clearly expected her to embarrass herself. Mr. Dalton leaned against a table, grinning widely. "Go on, then. Impress us," he said. Lena took a deep breath and placed her fingers on the keys. They trembled slightly. She didn't even know what to play. She hadn't practiced, hadn't even thought about performing in years. But when her fingers touched the cool ivory keys, something inside her came alive again. At first she pressed a few uncertain notes, almost as if testing if she still remembered how. A few people giggled. Mr. Dalton rolled his eyes, clearly expecting it to be over soon. But then she closed her eyes, and the next sound that came out was not uncertain. It was soft but sure, smooth like the whisper of wind through trees. The laughter faded. The pianist, who was smirking before now, leaned in slightly, his expression changing. Lena's hands began to move with a rhythm that felt natural, effortless. Each note flowed into the next like a river finding its path. The melody was simple at first, gentle and quiet, but it carried something the room hadn't felt all night. Emotion. In that moment, everything else disappeared for her. The guests, the lights, the humiliation, none of it mattered. All that existed was the music. The song she played wasn't from a sheet or a book. It came from her heart. Every note told a story she couldn't put into words, of love, loss, struggle, and hope. People stopped talking. Glasses were lowered onto tables. Even Mr. Dalton, who had been smirking moments ago, looked suddenly unsure of what was happening. Lena didn't see their faces, but she could feel the shift in the room. Her fingers moved faster now, her body swaying slightly with the rhythm. The melody rose and fell like waves, each sound more powerful than the last. The air felt heavy with emotion. When she finally opened her eyes, she saw something she hadn't expected. Silence. Complete stunned silence. Every person in that room was watching her, frozen in awe. For the first time that night, Lena didn't feel invisible. The last few notes drifted softly into the air, fading into quiet. Her hands rested still on the piano keys. A few seconds passed before anyone moved. Then a single person began to clap. It was soft at first, almost hesitant. Then another joined in, and another. Before long, the entire hall erupted in applause. Lena sat there overwhelmed. She didn't know what to do. She had just played like she used to years ago, when music was her world, before she had to give it all up to care for her mother, before bills and long work hours stole that part of her life away. Mr. Dalton, however, stood there speechless. His face had lost that smug grin. He looked almost embarrassed, though he tried to hide it behind a tight smile. "Well," he said finally, forcing a laugh. "Looks like we discovered some hidden talent tonight." The crowd laughed, but this time not at her. They laughed at him, at his failed attempt to humiliate her. Lena stood, gave a small bow, and walked away quietly. She didn't need praise or pity. She just wanted to finish her shift and go home. But something had changed in her that night. The music she thought she had lost forever had found its way back. As she passed by Mr. Dalton on her way out, he avoided her eyes. The same people who had ignored her earlier now watched her with newfound respect. A few even stopped her to say how beautiful her playing was. Lena simply smiled and thanked them, though her heart was still pounding. When she stepped outside the hall, the cool night air hit her face. She looked up at the stars and took a deep breath. For the first time in a long while, she felt alive again. She didn't know what would come next, whether this night would mean anything or just fade like so many others. But deep down, she sensed that something had shifted. Life had quietly opened a new door for her, and as the sound of the city filled the distance, she whispered softly to herself, "Maybe it's not too late to begin again." The night at the gala didn't end when Lena walked out of the hall. Even after her shift was over, her mind replayed every moment of what had just happened. She could still hear the echo of the last note, feel the stunned silence, and remember the way the crowd had gone from mockery to awe in a matter of minutes. It was unlike anything she had ever experienced before. After clocking out, she walked slowly through the quiet streets, the city lights reflecting off puddles from the earlier rain. Most people who had attended the gala would forget her as soon as they left the hall, but she could not forget what had just unfolded. It was more than the music itself. It was the way people had listened, really listened. For a moment she had been seen, truly seen, not just as a waitress or someone who served tables, but as someone who mattered. Still, the embarrassment she had felt at first lingered in her mind. Mr. Dalton had intended to humiliate her, and she had been certain she would fail. That thought had been unbearable at first, the idea of standing in front of dozens of wealthy strangers, their eyes judging her, waiting for her to make a mistake. The fear had made her fingers tremble, her heart race, and her stomach twist in knots. She remembered the weight of it all as she had walked toward the piano, each step heavier than the last. Yet, when she sat down and let the music take over, the fear melted away. She had forgotten the audience entirely. Her hands had known the keys like old friends even after so many years. She realized that music had always been a part of her, no matter where life had taken her. The feeling was intoxicating, almost magical. It reminded her of the girl she used to be, the one who dreamed big and refused to let anything stop her from creating. As Lena walked home, her mind kept replaying Mr. Dalton's expression. She had expected him to laugh or make a cruel comment. Instead, she had caught the first flicker of confusion, almost panic on his face as the melody filled the room. She could almost hear his thoughts. How could someone like her play like that? It made her smile, but only slightly. She knew the real challenge hadn't even started yet. The night had given her attention, yes, but it had also placed her in the center of a world that didn't often welcome people like her. By the time she reached her small apartment, the adrenaline had begun to fade. Leaving behind a quiet exhaustion, she unlocked the door and stepped inside, greeted by the familiar smell of home, old furniture, laundry, and the faint scent of the tea she had left on the stove that afternoon. It was simple and ordinary, but comforting. For a moment, she allowed herself to sit down and close her eyes, letting the events of the night sink in. She thought about the guests at the gala. How many of them had ever really paid attention to the people serving them? Not many, she was sure. Most of them moved through life expecting to be entertained, expecting the world to bend to their whims, and yet somehow for a brief moment she had made them stop. They had listened. They had felt something. That realization made her chest tighten in a way she hadn't expected. The next morning, Lena woke up to find her phone buzzing with messages she didn't recognize. At first, she ignored them, assuming they were from work or friends. But as she unlocked her phone, she realized something extraordinary had happened. Photos and videos from the gala had begun circulating online. Someone had recorded her performance on a phone, capturing the moment she had transformed from a timid waitress into someone commanding a room with her music. Comments flooded in, some praising her talent, others expressing shock and admiration at what had happened. People were calling her an inspiration, a hidden genius, someone who should have been given a chance long ago. Lena sat on her bed, staring at the screen in disbelief. She had never expected anything like this. She had played the piano for herself for years, quietly, without anyone knowing. The thought that strangers from all over the city, even the world, were now watching her and admiring her talent was overwhelming. But it was also thrilling. For the first time in a long while, she felt that maybe life had a new possibility waiting for her. Something she had once dreamed of, and now it was within reach. At work, the reactions were mixed. Some of her co-workers congratulated her, whispering about how they had never known she could play so beautifully. Others were simply astonished, unable to process the idea that someone they saw every day as just a waitress could possess such skill. Even the regular customers who frequented the cafe where she worked started asking questions, curious about the mysterious young woman whose talent had stunned a wealthy crowd. Mr. Dalton, however, became a topic of conversation in ways he never anticipated. His plan to embarrass Lena had backfired spectacularly. Instead of being mocked, she became the hero of the story. Friends and business associates teased him about underestimating her, and the videos from the gala circulated in high society news feeds and social media. The irony was delicious to anyone who had witnessed the event. Lena herself had no interest in humiliating him. She didn't need revenge. The music had already done that for her, but Lena knew she had to think carefully. The attention was exciting, yes, but it was also dangerous. People would want to know her story, and she had kept much of her life private. She wasn't sure she was ready to reveal everything about the years she had spent caring for her mother, the sacrifices she had made, or the dreams she had set aside. She felt nervous at the thought of stepping into the spotlight. What if they judged her past choices? What if the world saw her as lucky rather than talented? Despite the nerves, a part of her knew that this was her chance. She had been given a window, a rare opportunity to reclaim a piece of herself she had thought lost forever. The question was whether she would step through it or retreat into the shadows again. Over the next few days, invitations and messages continued to arrive. Music teachers, schools, and even small orchestras reached out, asking her to perform or to share her story. News outlets wanted interviews, curious about the young woman who had stunned an audience that included the city's elite. It was overwhelming, and Lena felt the weight of decision pressing on her. But deep down, the thought of returning to music, Truly embracing it again sparked something she hadn't felt in years: hope. She began practicing quietly at her apartment, setting up an old keyboard she had stored away. Her fingers, at first rusty and unsure, gradually remembered the motions, the rhythm, the feeling of connection to the keys. Music flowed through her again, not just as sound, but as a language of her own making. She realized how much she had missed it. Not just the playing, but the escape, the expression, the way it made her feel alive. One afternoon, she received a call from a local music academy. They had seen the videos online and wanted to offer her a small scholarship, giving her access to professional training and instruments she hadn't touched in years. Lena felt tears welling in her eyes. She had dreamed of studying music once, but life had pulled her away. Now it seemed the universe was offering her another chance, a path she could choose to follow or ignore. Meanwhile, at work, her colleagues watched her differently. Some were genuinely proud, others still treated her like a server, but now there was a quiet respect in the air. Even the regular customers noticed a change in her confidence. She carried herself differently, a subtle shift in posture and demeanor that came from being seen, truly seen, for her talent. Despite the attention and opportunities, Lena remained grounded. She did not rush into any decisions. She continued her shifts at the cafe, talking to customers, listening to their stories, and moving through her daily life with the same quiet humility she had always carried. But the fire inside her had been reignited. Music was no longer just a memory. It was a living, breathing part of her once more. The world outside was changing too. People who had dismissed her now spoke of her as someone extraordinary. The videos of her playing were shared again and again, with headlines calling her the hidden genius waitress and the young woman who silenced the elite. Mr. Dalton himself avoided speaking publicly about the incident. His plan had completely backfired, and everyone seemed to know it. Yet Lena didn't dwell on his humiliation. She had something far more important now: the rediscovery of herself. In the quiet of her apartment that evening, Lena sat at the keyboard and began to play. The melody started slowly, hesitantly, but soon it grew stronger. Each note carried her hopes, her dreams, and the courage she had found in the past few days. She played not for anyone else, not for recognition, but for herself. And as she played, she realized that the world she had once thought closed to her was opening slowly, gently, welcoming her back. By the end of that week, Lena had made a decision. She would pursue music again, carefully, steadily, and on her own terms. She would accept the offers that felt right, and she would ignore those that did not. And most importantly, she would never forget the lesson she had learned on that night at the gala, that even in a world full of judgment and expectation, a single moment of courage and talent could change everything. It was the beginning of a new chapter in her life, a chapter filled with uncertainty, yes, but also with hope, excitement, and the promise of a dream finally given a second chance. And Lena, once the quiet waitress who had walked unnoticed through life, now walked toward the future with a steady heart, ready to play her music for the world. The days after the gala were a whirlwind for Lena, though she tried to keep herself grounded. Even as messages and invitations poured in, she continued her routine, quietly moving through her workday as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But inside, her mind was alive with thoughts she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. She kept thinking about the piano, the notes, the sound of music filling the room and capturing the attention of everyone in the hall. It was the first time in a long while that she felt a sense of purpose, and it was intoxicating. Despite her resolve to remain cautious, the attention she was receiving was impossible to ignore. The video from the gala had gone viral. People were sharing it across social media, commenting on it and speculating about her past. "Who is she?" one post asked. "How could someone so young and humble play like that?" another wondered. People were in awe, and Lena had no idea how far her performance had traveled until she started seeing news outlets covering the story. At first, she hesitated to respond to reporters and interview requests. The thought of sharing her personal life, her struggles, and the sacrifices she had made was intimidating. She had always been private, and the idea of opening herself up to public scrutiny made her nervous. But she also knew she couldn't ignore it forever. The attention was a sign, a signal that she might finally have a chance to reclaim the life she had once dreamed of. One afternoon, she received a call from a small music academy. The voice on the other end was kind but enthusiastic. They had seen the viral video and wanted to offer her a chance to come in and play for them in person. They explained that their teachers believed she had extraordinary talent and wanted to help her develop it further. Lena felt a mixture of excitement and fear. She had not played in front of anyone in years except for that one unexpected night, and the thought of doing it again made her hands sweat. But she also knew this was an opportunity she couldn't ignore. The next day, she visited the academy. The building was old but welcoming, with posters of past performers lining the walls and pianos of various sizes placed carefully in the practice rooms. Lena's heart raced as she was guided to a practice room, a small space with a grand piano waiting for her. It was beautiful and intimidating at the same time, much like the hall where she had performed the night of the gala. She sat down, closed her eyes, and let her fingers hover above the keys. The memories of the past flooded back, long hours spent practicing as a child, the encouragement from her mother, the dreams she had held close to her heart. She played a few tentative notes, unsure if she still remembered the skill she once had. Then slowly the music began to flow. It was hesitant at first, but as she played, her confidence grew. Each note was a reminder that she hadn't lost her talent, only forgotten how to trust it. The teacher at the academy watched silently from the door, clearly impressed. When she finished playing, he smiled warmly. "You have something very rare," he said. "Not just technical skill, but emotion, depth. You play like you are telling a story." Lena felt a flush of pride mixed with disbelief. She had never thought of herself as exceptional. She had simply loved to play. Over the next few weeks, Lena began spending more time at the academy, practicing and learning again. Each day, her confidence grew. She started experimenting with new melodies, revisiting old ones, and even composing small pieces of her own. The piano became a refuge, a place where she could forget the world and simply create. Word of her talent continued to spread. Invitations to perform at local events arrived, and though she was hesitant, Lena began to accept a few. She chose small, intimate gatherings at first, places where the audience would truly listen rather than judge. Each performance built her confidence and reminded her why she had fallen in love with music in the first place. Meanwhile, the gala video continued to attract attention. People who had attended the event spoke of it in hushed tones, impressed by the waitress who had silenced the room. Mr. Dalton, the billionaire who had originally intended to embarrass her, was now the subject of subtle ridicule in social circles. His smirk had vanished, replaced by a forced smile whenever the story came up. He had underestimated Lena, and the world had noticed. Despite the growing attention and opportunities, Lena remained humble. She continued working at the cafe, keeping her connection to everyday life. She knew she had to remain grounded, to remember where she came from and why music mattered to her. Every note she played was infused with that history, that sense of resilience and determination that had carried her through difficult times. One evening, she was invited to perform at a private event organized by a local cultural group. It wasn't a grand gala like the one she had faced before, but the room was filled with people who genuinely appreciated music. As she sat at the piano, she felt the familiar nervousness, but it was tempered by a quiet determination. She closed her eyes and let the music flow. The audience was captivated. They listened in silence, moved by the emotion in her playing. Some closed their eyes, some nodded along, and others leaned forward, completely absorbed. Lena felt a deep sense of fulfillment, realizing that her music had the power to touch people's hearts in a way words never could. After the performance, several audience members approached her, expressing their admiration and curiosity about her story. Lena spoke cautiously, sharing a little about her past, her love for music, and the sacrifices she had made. She didn't go into every detail, but she wanted them to understand that her journey had not been easy. The response was overwhelmingly positive, and for the first time, she felt a sense of belonging in the world of music. The experiences over the past few weeks had begun to change Lena. She walked taller, spoke with more confidence, and approached life with a new sense of purpose. Music was no longer just a memory or a fleeting hobby. It had become a central part of her identity, and with each performance, she discovered new depths of emotion and skill she hadn't realized she possessed. Even in moments of doubt, she found encouragement. Messages continued to pour in online, people sharing their support and admiration. It was a reminder that her talent had touched more than just the room where she had first played. It had reached strangers, had inspired curiosity, and had sparked hope in those who saw her story. At the same time, Lena remained cautious about the pressures that fame and recognition could bring. She knew that sudden attention could be overwhelming, and she wanted to remain true to herself. She practiced diligently, continued her studies at the academy, and chose her performances carefully. It was important to her that every note she played was authentic, coming from a place of genuine emotion rather than obligation or expectation. The world around her was beginning to change as well. People who had previously overlooked her now recognized her presence and talent. Colleagues, customers, and even acquaintances began to treat her with respect, acknowledging the skills and determination she had always possessed. It was a subtle shift, but one that reinforced her belief in her own worth. Lena also reflected on Mr. Dalton and the incident at the gala. She realized that while his intentions had been cruel, the experience had ultimately been a catalyst for change. It had forced her to confront her fears, to reclaim her confidence, and to step into a world she had long avoided. What he had intended as humiliation had instead become a turning point, a moment that allowed her to embrace her true potential. As the weeks passed, Lena continued to perform, practice, and share her music with others. She began to understand that her talent was not just a personal gift, but a way to connect with people, to tell stories and evoke emotions that transcended words. Each performance strengthened her sense of purpose and reminded her of the journey she had undertaken to reach this point. Her life was no longer defined solely by work or survival. It was now shaped by creativity, expression, and connection. She had found a way to merge the responsibilities of everyday life with the passion that had always driven her. And with each note she played, she discovered not only the power of music but the strength within herself to embrace opportunities, face challenges, and continue growing. By the end of this period, Lena had transformed in ways she could hardly have imagined. She was no longer just the quiet waitress who had served drinks at a gala. She was a musician, an artist, and a storyteller. Her journey was far from over, but she had taken the first steps toward a future filled with possibility, recognition, and fulfillment. Through all of it, Lena remained grounded, remembering the long hours of practice, the sacrifices she had made, and the moments of doubt she had overcome. She knew that her path would not always be easy, but she also understood that the reward lay not just in applause or recognition, but in the ability to touch hearts, inspire others, and live a life true to herself. And so, with each passing day, Lena continued to play, learn, and grow. The music that had once been a distant memory was now a living, breathing part of her, guiding her through a world that was beginning to see her not as a waitress or a bystander, but as a remarkable individual with a gift that could change everything. Weeks had passed since the gala, but the memory of that night still lingered in Lena's mind. The applause, the stunned faces, and the way the music seemed to wrap around every person in the room, it had left a mark on her that would never fade. Since then, her life had begun to change, slowly but surely. She had started practicing more consistently, taking lessons at the music academy, and performing in small events that allowed her to regain confidence. Each performance reminded her of the joy and power music could bring, not just to her, but to everyone who listened. Then came the invitation that made her heart pound like a drum. A high-profile gala, hosted by one of the city's most influential groups, requested her presence. They had seen the video of her performance at the previous gala, and they wanted her to play the piano for their event. This was different from any performance she had done recently. This was an audience that would be far more critical, more sophisticated, and certainly more difficult to impress. Lena stared at the invitation for several minutes. Her mind raced with doubt and anticipation. She had come so far since the first night, yet the thought of performing again in front of the elite, many of whom were even more powerful than Mr. Dalton, was intimidating. What if she failed? What if this time, the outcome was humiliation rather than admiration? Still, deep inside, she knew she could not back down. Music was no longer just a hobby or a forgotten dream. It had become a part of who she was. This was another opportunity to prove to herself and the world that she belonged in this space. She took a deep breath, accepted the invitation, and began preparing. For days, Lena practiced tirelessly. Her apartment became a world of black and white keys, melodies weaving through the air as she tried different arrangements and compositions. She experimented with variations, improvising as she went. letting her emotions guide her fingers. The nerves remained, but they were now joined by a growing sense of excitement. She had learned that fear often accompanied moments that mattered the most. It reminded her that she was alive, that she cared deeply about what she was about to do. Finally, the night arrived. The venue was magnificent, with chandeliers that sparkled like diamonds and tables draped in white linen, surrounded by people dressed in elegant gowns and tailored suits. Cameras lined the walls, capturing every moment. Lena felt her pulse quicken as she stepped out of the car and walked toward the entrance. She carried herself with quiet confidence, though the familiar flutter of nerves remained in her stomach. Inside, the room buzzed with conversation and laughter, a mixture of casual socializing and subtle competition. People were dressed in their finest, many wearing expressions that suggested they expected perfection from everything around them, including the music. Lena felt the weight of their expectations, but she reminded herself that she had faced this before and had succeeded. She could do it again. As she was guided to the piano, she caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd, Mr. Dalton. His expression was guarded, a mix of curiosity and perhaps a hint of worry. He had expected her to fade into obscurity after the first gala, but clearly he had not anticipated her rise. He glanced around the room, noting the attention she was beginning to draw even before her performance. Lena met his eyes briefly, and she sensed a silent challenge. Not a challenge he had issued, but one she was determined to answer. When the time came, the room quieted. Lena approached the piano with calm steps, her fingers lightly brushing the keys as she adjusted the bench. The audience's eyes were on her, some curious, some skeptical, and some waiting to see if the buzz around her talent was real. The pressure was intense, but Lena focused inward, centering herself on the music rather than the judgment. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The first note she played was soft, almost like a whisper, yet it demanded attention. It floated across the room, and gradually a hush fell over the crowd. Conversation stopped mid-sentence, and the laughter faded. People leaned forward instinctively, drawn to the sound she was creating. The melody grew, flowing naturally from her fingers. Lena let her emotions guide her, pouring every ounce of feeling into the music. Each note told a story of hope, of struggle, of resilience. Her fingers moved with precision and grace, dancing across the keys as though they had a life of their own. The audience, who had initially arrived with expectations of polite entertainment, found themselves captivated, unable to look away or even blink. Even the critics and elite guests who prided themselves on their sophistication were drawn in. They recognized the depth of her playing, the emotion behind every chord. The music was no longer just sound. It was a conversation, an invitation to experience something real, raw, and beautiful. Lena felt a surge of confidence. The audience's energy was palpable, feeding her performance, pushing her to explore the music further. She experimented with dynamics, letting soft passages lull the listeners into a delicate calm before rising into powerful crescendos that resonated through the room. The contrast created tension, emotion, and release. And she played as if she were telling a story only she fully understood, yet everyone could feel. Mr. Dalton watched from across the room, his earlier smirk replaced by a tense expression. He realized that the young woman he had once tried to embarrass had grown far beyond his expectations. She had not only survived the first encounter, but had flourished under pressure, transforming the piano into a voice that could silence even the most powerful people in the room. He shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable, as her music filled the space. By the middle of her performance, the audience was completely absorbed. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Others leaned forward, gripping their hands together as though holding on to every note. The sound of Lena's fingers striking the keys with confidence and passion seemed to bend time itself. For a few fleeting moments, the grand hall was not just a venue, but a vessel carrying emotion, memory, and shared humanity. As the final passage approached, Lena allowed herself to fully embrace the music. She let her hands move faster, more dynamically, expressing the intensity of her emotions without restraint. The notes rose, dipped, and intertwined, creating a tapestry of sound that held the room in rapture. Every listener felt the story she was telling, even without understanding its words. It was pure, unfiltered expression, and it left a mark on everyone present. When the last note resonated and faded into silence, the room remained still for a heartbeat. Then gradually applause erupted. It started softly, hesitant at first, but quickly grew into a roar of admiration, awe, and respect. People rose from their seats, clapping with genuine appreciation for the talent they had just witnessed. Lena remained seated for a moment, absorbing the reaction, letting it sink in that she had once again conquered fear and turned it into triumph. The audience surrounded her with praise and curiosity, eager to know more about the young woman who had so effortlessly captured their attention. Questions about her training, her past, and her future flooded in. She answered them with humility, carefully choosing her words while maintaining her quiet dignity. She wanted her music to speak louder than anything she could say. Even Mr. Dalton could not hide his astonishment. The smirk that had once defined his presence was gone. He shifted uncomfortably, realizing that his attempt to belittle her had not only failed but had backfired spectacularly. Lena had taken what he meant as humiliation and transformed it into a performance that would be remembered, a moment that would define her growing reputation. Afterward, as she left the piano and received final congratulations, Lena felt an overwhelming mix of exhaustion, relief, and exhilaration. She had faced one of the most critical audiences of her life and emerged not only unscathed, but celebrated. The experience reminded her of why she had loved music in the first place: the ability to connect, to communicate, and to move people in ways words could never achieve. That night, back in the quiet of her apartment, Lena reflected on the journey she had undertaken. She thought of the first gala, the nervous steps toward the piano, the fear and doubt that had threatened to paralyze her. She realized that those moments of vulnerability had been the starting point for growth, courage, and discovery. She had learned that true strength often comes from facing fear head-on and trusting in one's abilities. The performance also taught her something else: that recognition and success were not just about talent. They were about authenticity, courage, and the willingness to share a part of oneself with the world. Each note she had played had carried a piece of her soul, and that honesty had resonated with everyone in the room. As Lena settled into her daily life over the following days, she carried the lessons of that night with her. She continued practicing, performing, and refining her skill. Opportunities continued to come, but she chose them carefully, focusing on those that aligned with her values and artistic vision. She remained humble, grounded, and dedicated, knowing that her journey was only beginning. Through it all, Lena understood that music was no longer just a part of her past. It was her present and future. She had discovered the power of resilience, the impact of courage, and the ability to transform fear into beauty. And with each performance, each practice session, she continued to grow, inspire, and share the extraordinary gift that had always. The days following Lena's breathtaking performance at the gala passed in a blur. Her phone rang constantly with messages from curious strangers, music enthusiasts, and local news outlets wanting interviews. The video of her playing had been shared countless times, each view bringing her more attention than she could have imagined. Every day she discovered someone new had seen her performance and wanted to meet her, talk to her, or hear her play again. It was both exhilarating and exhausting. Lena still tried to maintain her normal routine, going to work at the cafe, serving coffee and pastries, and smiling politely at the regular customers who knew her by name. But even there, things had changed. People treated her differently now, with a quiet respect that hadn't been there before. A few patrons approached her to compliment her music, some shyly, some boldly, asking about her story. She spoke carefully, revealing only pieces of her life, enough to share her journey without feeling vulnerable. Her lessons at the academy had become more intense. Teachers were pushing her, encouraging her to explore complex compositions and experiment with new techniques. They saw potential in her that went far beyond a single viral performance. They spoke of opportunities, competitions, collaborations, even scholarships that could launch her career if she was willing to commit. Lena listened carefully, her heart racing at the possibilities, but she was cautious. Fame was new to her, and she did not want to rush into anything that might compromise her love for music or her sense of self. One morning, a message arrived that made her pause and hold her breath. A well-known orchestra director had seen the viral video and wanted to meet her. He invited her to play at a small private audition, just to see her skills firsthand. Lena's heart skipped a beat. This was serious, far beyond the small events she had been performing at. She had dreamed of such an opportunity when she was younger, but life had always gotten in the way. Now the chance had come to her doorstep. The days leading up to the audition were tense. Lena practiced tirelessly, her fingers moving over the keys with precision and care. She tried pieces she had once mastered, compositions she had long forgotten, and new arrangements that challenged her creativity. Her apartment became a world of music, filled with the sound of scales, arpeggios, and melodies that echoed through the small rooms. Every note she played carried both her determination and the weight of her past, the sacrifices she had made, and the dreams she had almost given up on. On the day of the audition, Lena dressed simply but elegantly, choosing an outfit that made her feel confident without being flashy. She arrived at the music hall, a space larger and more formal than any she had performed in recently. The grand piano gleamed in the center, and the room was lined with chairs, some filled with musicians, some empty, waiting for the audition. Her hands trembled slightly as she approached the instrument, but she took a deep breath and reminded herself of everything she had learned. The director watched her silently, a neutral expression on his face. He had seen many talented musicians before, but something about Lena intrigued him. Perhaps it was the story he had read about her, or perhaps it was the depth of emotion he could already sense in her playing from the video. Either way, he was patient, letting her take the stage in her own time. Lena sat down and placed her fingers on the keys. The first notes were tentative, almost testing the waters, but then she let the music flow naturally. She played as she had at the gala, letting her emotions guide her, allowing her story to be told through sound. Each passage, each chord carried layers of feeling: joy, sorrow, hope, and resilience. The room, filled with professionals who had heard countless pianists, grew silent. They listened intently, captivated by the nuance and depth in her performance. The director's expression shifted slightly. He leaned forward, paying closer attention, recognizing something rare in her playing. He noted the precision, the control, and most importantly, the emotion that came through every note. This was not just skill, it was artistry, a voice speaking through the piano. Lena felt the energy in the room, and it fueled her further. She played with more confidence, more passion, exploring the keys with a freedom she hadn't felt in years. When she finished, the silence lingered for a heartbeat before the director finally spoke. His voice was calm, but his tone carried a hint of amazement. "You have a gift," he said. "Not many musicians can move an audience the way you do. Your technique is remarkable, but what truly sets you apart is the emotion, the story you tell with your music. Have you considered a professional career?" Lena smiled softly, her heart pounding. She had dreamed of this moment for years, but now that it was here, it felt almost surreal. I always loved music," she said quietly. "But life sometimes gets in the way." He nodded knowingly. "I understand. But it's never too late to reclaim what's yours. You have potential to reach far beyond what most musicians ever achieve. With proper guidance and opportunities, you could inspire countless people with your talent." The director arranged for a series of auditions and meetings with other professionals in the field. Suddenly, Lena's world expanded beyond anything she had imagined. Invitations to perform in larger venues, collaborations with respected musicians, and opportunities to record her music began to arrive. She felt a mixture of excitement and responsibility. Every choice she made now had consequences, but it was the first time she had control over her own path in years. Even as opportunities grew, Lena remained thoughtful and grounded. She continued working at the cafe, keeping a connection to her life before music became central again. She understood that her talent did not make her superior. It was simply a tool, a way to share something meaningful with the world. She also stayed humble, remembering the nights when she felt invisible, serving tables without anyone noticing her presence. Those experiences had shaped her, giving her empathy and perspective that many others lacked. The media attention began to grow as well. Local newspapers and online publications ran stories about the young woman who had silenced elite audiences with her music. Reporters were fascinated not only by her talent but also by her story, how she had put aside her dreams to care for her family, only to rediscover them years later. Lena carefully navigated interviews, sharing enough to inspire and connect with people without feeling exposed or vulnerable. Her performances became more frequent, each one honing her skills and strengthening her confidence. She discovered that her music had a unique effect on people, moving them emotionally, bringing them to tears, making them smile, and sometimes even changing the way they thought about life. The connection between her and her audience became something she cherished deeply. Music was no longer just a personal passion. It had become a bridge between her experiences and the hearts of others. Meanwhile, Mr. Dalton's presence lingered in the background. Though he was no longer a central figure in her life, the memory of his attempt to humiliate her reminded her of how far she had come. She did not hold anger or resentment toward him. Instead, she recognized that the event had been a catalyst, pushing her into a world she might not have explored otherwise. His initial misjudgment became a part of her story, a contrast that highlighted her resilience and talent. One evening, Lena received an invitation to perform at a prestigious music festival. The festival organizers had seen the growing buzz around her talent and wanted her to play alongside renowned musicians from around the world. It was the largest stage she had ever been offered, and the thought of performing in front of such a distinguished audience made her nervous. But the excitement far outweighed the fear. She had worked too hard and come too far to let doubt stop her now. In preparation, she spent hours practicing, perfecting every note and exploring ways to make her performance truly unforgettable. She wanted to share not just her skill but the story behind it, the journey of struggle, perseverance, and discovery that had shaped her. Each practice session was more than repetition. It was an act of storytelling, of connecting her emotions to the music and conveying them to anyone who would listen. By the night of the festival, Lena had transformed completely. She walked onto the stage with quiet confidence, her fingers poised above the keys, her mind focused and calm. The audience, filled with musicians, critics, and music lovers from around the world, fell silent as she began to play. The notes flowed effortlessly, each one carrying the depth of her experience, the lessons she had learned, and the passion that had never left her. As she played, Lena felt the energy of the audience merge with her own. She realized that music was not just a performance, it was a conversation, a shared experience that connected her with every listener in the room. Tears glistened in some eyes, smiles appeared on faces, and for a few moments the world outside ceased to exist. All that mattered was the music, the story, and the emotions they evoked. When the last note faded, the silence lingered before the applause erupted, louder and more heartfelt than anything Lena had ever experienced. The audience rose, clapping, cheering, and calling out her name. In that moment, Lena understood the true power of her talent, not just to entertain, but to inspire, to heal, and to touch the hearts of countless people. It was a turning point in her life. She had not only reclaimed her dreams, but had also created a space where her music. The months that followed Lena's performance at the prestigious music festival were a whirlwind of change and discovery. Invitations to perform came from cities she had only dreamed of visiting. Her name became known in music circles, and her videos continued to circulate, inspiring others who had long forgotten dreams or talents hidden by circumstance. Yet through all the excitement, Lena remained grounded. She never allowed herself to be swept away by fame. She knew that the real journey was not in recognition, but in continuing to grow, create, and connect with people through music. Every morning, she woke early, taking quiet walks before practice. The world was still hers, not just the stages or the accolades. She would sometimes pass a cafe or a street corner and notice someone carrying a phone, watching the video of her playing. Smiles would cross their faces, and she would feel a strange, comforting connection to strangers she had never met. Her music had become more than performance. It had become a bridge, linking her experiences with those of countless others. Despite the opportunities and recognition, Lena never forgot her roots. She continued to work part-time at the cafe she had always known, cherishing the simplicity of her life there. Serving customers, chatting with familiar faces, and walking the streets she had grown up on reminded her of the journey she had undertaken. She had learned that success was not just about reaching the top, but about staying true to oneself along the way. One evening, she received an invitation that would change everything. A renowned orchestra was hosting a gala to celebrate young talents in music, and they wanted her to perform as the main feature. This was unlike any other invitation. This event would bring together the most distinguished musicians, critics, and patrons of the arts. It was a high-pressure situation, but it also held the promise of cementing her place in the world she had been gradually stepping into. Lena felt a surge of anticipation and nerves. She practiced day and night, not just for the technical challenge, but to ensure that her music conveyed the full depth of her journey. She thought of the first gala, of Mr. Dalton, of the moments she had doubted herself, and of every note that had allowed her to reclaim her identity. This performance was not just for an audience. It was a celebration of her resilience, her courage, and the power of following one's passion against all odds. The night of the gala arrived. The hall was magnificent, more grand than any Lena had ever performed in. Chandeliers hung like jewels from the ceiling, casting a warm glow over the polished floors. The audience was composed of music lovers, critics, and influential figures from around the world. Cameras lined the walls, recording every moment for later broadcasts. Lena felt the familiar flutter of nerves, but it was joined by excitement, a feeling she had come to embrace as a sign that she was alive and ready. When she approached the grand piano, her fingers brushed lightly against the keys. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The first note was soft, gentle, almost like a whisper, but it carried weight. She let her hands move naturally, allowing the music to take control. Every chord, every melody spoke of her life's journey, the struggles, the moments of doubt, the victories, and the rediscovery of her talent. The audience was captivated. Conversation ceased. Glasses were lowered onto tables, and every eye focused on Lena as she poured herself into the music. She allowed herself to feel the emotions she had held back for so long, the joy, the sorrow, the hope, and the gratitude. Each note resonated with honesty, and for a few fleeting moments the world outside the hall disappeared. Even Mr. Dalton was there, invited by mutual acquaintances. He sat quietly at the back, his earlier arrogance replaced by curiosity and respect. He had underestimated her once, and now he witnessed her mastery firsthand. The smirk that had defined his presence at the first gala was gone, replaced by a subtle acknowledgement that Lena's talent was undeniable. He shifted slightly in his seat, a silent concession to the extraordinary journey she had undertaken. As the performance progressed, Lena's confidence grew. Her fingers moved faster, more fluidly, tracing melodies that soared and dipped like the emotions within her. She allowed herself moments of improvisation, letting her instincts guide her. The audience responded instinctively, leaning in, some closing their eyes, others swaying gently, completely absorbed in the music. The energy in the room was electric, yet intimate, a testament to the connection she had created through her playing. When the final note echoed and faded, there was a heartbeat of silence before the applause erupted. It was thunderous, sustained, and heartfelt. People rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, and calling out her name. Critics and patrons alike were visibly moved, some wiping tears from their eyes. Lena allowed herself a quiet smile, humbled by the reaction. She had not played to impress, but to express, and the audience had received it as she had intended. After the performance, Lena was approached by renowned musicians, music directors, and event organizers. They spoke of opportunities to perform internationally, to collaborate on recordings, and even to mentor young musicians who had talents waiting to be discovered. The scope of her life had expanded far beyond what she could have imagined just months earlier. She realized that her music had become a force, a way to inspire, heal, and connect with people in ways she had never thought possible. Despite the whirlwind of attention, Lena remained grounded. She continued her lessons, refined her skills, and carefully selected her performances. She understood that true artistry was not just about recognition, but about growth, authenticity, and the ability to touch hearts. She also found joy in small moments, playing quietly in her apartment, sharing her music with friends, or even returning to the cafe for an afternoon shift. Those simple moments reminded her of where she came from and why her journey mattered. Her story also became a source of inspiration for others. Interviews, articles, and online posts highlighted not only her talent but her perseverance, the sacrifices she had made, the courage she had shown in the face of doubt, and the way she had embraced her passion despite obstacles. People who had once felt invisible or overlooked saw themselves in her story and found hope that they too could reclaim their dreams. As Lena's reputation grew, she became aware of the responsibility that came with it. Her music was no longer just personal expression. It had the power to influence, motivate, and uplift. She approached every performance with thoughtfulness, striving to connect authentically with her audience. She also sought opportunities to mentor young musicians, sharing her experiences and encouraging them to follow their passions, regardless of the challenges they faced. One afternoon, Lena received a letter from a prestigious international music academy. They invited her to join as a resident performer and student, offering resources and mentorship to develop her talent even further. It was the culmination of years of dedication, resilience, and belief in herself. She realized that the journey that had begun with a simple act of courage, playing the piano in a room full of strangers, had now opened doors she had once thought closed forever. In quiet moments, Lena reflected on the path she had taken. She remembered the first gala, the fear and humiliation she had felt, and how that night had ultimately become the catalyst for her growth. She remembered the small apartment where she practiced alone, the long hours at the cafe and the doubt that had haunted her, and she understood that every experience, every challenge, had contributed to the musician and the person she had become. Even Mr. Dalton became a part of her story, not as an antagonist but as a reminder of the obstacles that can push us toward unexpected growth. His attempt to embarrass her had inadvertently set her on a path that revealed her true potential. She no longer felt anger toward him. Instead, she acknowledged the role that challenge had played in shaping her journey. Lena's music continued to resonate with people far and wide. Each performance brought new opportunities, new audiences, and new connections. She discovered that the real joy of her talent lay not in accolades or applause, but in the ability to move people, to bring them hope, comfort, or inspiration through something as simple and profound as a piano melody. Over time, Lena became more than just a performer. She became a symbol of resilience and courage. Her story reminded people that talent alone is not enough. It is the perseverance, the willingness to face fear, and the courage to embrace one's true self that allows greatness to flourish. She had transformed from a quiet waitress into a musician whose influence reached far beyond her own expectations, touching lives she had never imagined. As Lena sat at the piano in her apartment one evening, reflecting on the journey she had traveled, she understood the lesson that had guided her all along. Success is not measured by wealth, recognition, or power, but by the ability to stay true to oneself and to share one's gifts with the world. Her music had given her more than fame. It had given her purpose, fulfillment, and a deep sense of connection to humanity. With a gentle smile, she placed her fingers on the keys and began to play. The notes flowed effortlessly, carrying the story of a journey that began with fear, blossomed into courage, and culminated in the celebration of life's possibilities. Each melody was a tribute to the moments that had shaped her, the people who had influenced her, and the music that had always been her guide.